Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The year 2020 has been a difficult year for the global economy as well as for Nornikel. But we have learned our lessons and we are still maintaining a top place in today's industry and are going to keep it, focusing at the same time on the growth, environmental and industrial safety programs. The total investment program through 2030 is estimated at more than $27 billion. A significant part of this amount will be used to improve safety, reliability of operations and environmental footprint. Nornikel is investing more than $5.5 billion in its environmental program, of which $3.6 billion will go into the sulfur program. Over $1.3 billion will be additionally invested to increase the reliability of the company's infrastructure. Together with these investments, our program for energy infrastructure renewal for 2021-2025 is now exceeding $4 billion. Based on these new programs, 60% of the company's infrastructure will be totally renewed over next 10 years. This investment will allow us to progress in three main dimensions, which are safety, energy efficiency, and the reduction of carbon emission. We will build reserve gas pipelines to increase sourcing reliability for the power plants and get rid of fuel oil in power assets. We will construct new generating facilities while increasing their efficiency ratio. Nornikel is already positioned in a lowest quartile of the carbon intensity curve and is committed to maintain this leadership among metals and mining businesses in the future. Climate change agenda belongs to our top priorities, along with the unprecedented sulfur program and other major initiatives. Large investments will go into growth projects. As a result, we are going to almost double the output in the Norilsk region and increase metal production by 30 to 40%. The future green economy will need more of the metals that we produce. So our ability to ensure growing volumes will further strengthen our competitive advantage. We will also pursue more of a customer-centric approach. We are changing accordingly our product portfolio to better serve green economy. A great example of this is the Nornikel's partnership with BASF. Both companies are integrating their door-to-door operations for the production of battery materials. We are also going to develop and set new standards by digitalizing market transactions. Nornikel is launching smart contracts and tokens for its metals, which will allow the company to deliver our products to customers in a more convenient and transparent way. It will give the industry necessary tools to guarantee responsible sourcing and trace carbon footprint, along with other ESG requirements. Our company is building the ecosystem in partnership with the Responsible Sourcing Blockchain Network Consortium, which is powered by IBM. A significant part of the Norilsk Nickel Sustainable Development Program is a strong focus on the high standards of social responsibility and the concept of social license to operate. We are going to invest more into this sphere. The company plans to strengthen its presence in the regions. A good example of it are the major housing renovation program and the program for the development of local healthcare system. Another important aspect of our strategy is transforming the traditional concept of the alignment of interests. It will be a transition from a more usual form of alignment between the management and the shareholders, new reading of this concept that provides for involving a broader range of stakeholders, including our workers, into a new motivation system. This will allow us to deliver on our plans and assure a continuity in value creation for our shareholders. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I will start my presentation with health and safety update for 2020. As you remember from our previous presentations, we embarked on a large program in 2013, and we're pleased to report that we managed to improve our lost time injury frequency rate by 80%. And we also reduced our accident statistics by 75%. We're still actually quite focused on the further reduction in the number of accidents. We announced zero tolerance to fatal accidents, and all our KPIs in the group and myself, they link to fatal accidents. Next slide shows that we are still good performers within the industry, and our lost time injury frequency rate was reported as 0.4, which is lowest in the industry amongst the peer group. And annually, we do the assessment by the major consultant companies. It was previously done by DuPont, and for 2 years in a row, we're doing this assessment with Bain. And it's based also on the same Bradley curve. And in 2020, we are ranked at 3, which is close to the industry average. And we're still striving to improve our performance. Our strategic objective, as I mentioned before, is zero fatality at our production sites, and the continuous improvement in the health and safety by means of our safety improvement program. In our safety plan, we introduced, in 2014, we introduced so-called deadly sins, or safety rules. And since then, we've been practicing them at all our operational sites. Also, there were 16 corporate standards developed and introduced in the company. And you can see the results. In 2013, we had 106 accidents, and this figure, as I mentioned before, reduced by 75%. And to this date, we had 26. It's still too much for the company, and unfortunately, we had 8 fatal injuries, and we're still working on a further improvement on these figures. On the same slide, you can see that there were 4 major concerns for the company. Because we're underground mining company, mostly predominantly underground mining company, we're very concerned with the rockfall accidents, with the interaction between the transport and pedestrian, and also isolation energy. And therefore, our major procedures and major standards about energy isolation of energy sources, about prevention of the rock falls, that's the transport and pedestrian interaction, and also, the working at heights. And there were several good programs introduced. One of them on a rock fall, where we mechanized almost all our activities in the rock support. We introduced new equipment. We've done quite exhaustive training for our employees, and we introduced new support systems. And also it's a behavioral-based hazard, and therefore we've done lots of work on teaching our people and guarding them during their work underground. With regards to the transport and pedestrian system, we introduced the PDS system, which actually allows pedestrian and large equipment operator see each other at the quite safe distance, and that prevents the the dangerous interaction. From the environmental point of view, in 2020, unfortunately, company encountered 3 major environmental incidents. On the 29th of May, there was a rupture at the diesel fuel tank in the vicinity of Karakan area, the power plant number 3. And due to this, approximately 21,000 tons of diesel fuel got rejected from the tank within close to 29 minutes. And our initial hypothesis was that the incident occurred due to the sudden failure of the piles due to some changes in the ground conditions underneath the fuel tank. The emergency procedure was initiated immediately, and close to 700 people were deployed in order to deal with this incident. They were from the company employees and also from the government rescue teams. Technical investigation was initiated by the government bodies, and currently it's in the final stage. The draft report was issued, and the consultation is in the process currently. The second one took place on June 28th, just 1 month after the first incident. But the nature of that, the incident was absolutely different to what we had in the first one. It was tailings water disposed in a tender on a request by the senior management of the concentrator. There was a rainfall, and the management of the concentrator overestimated the risk, and they decided to pump this, the water out of the water storage facility. In response to that, a company done the investigation, and it was identified as a necessary precaution. And obviously, the company, and there is a zero tolerance to the incident like this in the company, and therefore, to our regret, the management of the concentrator was dismissed, and the necessary communication was taken within the company. The water was tested by the government body and by the laboratories from the company in the several points in the river and in the nearby locations, and it was identified as within the permissible limits for hazardous materials. The next incident took place on July the 12th. In this particular case, approximately 44 tons of aviation fuel leaked from the pipeline connecting the riverbank to the fuel storage facility. And that was, in our assessment, was due to the lack of responsibility from the management of that particular location. And obviously, response was immediate, and we managed to clean the area. We managed to pump, the water fuel mixture, also separated this mixture. And, we cleaned the ground around this area. And according to statement from the government body, the area recognized as fully rehabilitated. Again, the company doesn't tolerate these kind of incidents, and management of that particular site was also dismissed. If you go back to the first incident, which is quite large on our radar, and it was quite, the public during this year. Therefore, I will stop on the more particular details of this incident. As I mentioned before, it took place on the 29th of May, and at the fuel farm at power plant number 3, and close to the area of Karakan. Incident doesn't affect Norilsk city and neighboring settlements, because it's quite far from the residential areas. Again, over quite a short period of time, 21,000 tons of diesel fuel got rejected from the ruptured diesel fuel tank. On a map, you can see the location of the power plant, and you can see the river system. So unfortunately, this wave of fuel was so strong that overspilled the bond wall and got into the unnamed creek, and then via Daldikan River, it reached Ambarna River, and we were quite fortunate that we managed to react and install bonds before it reached Pasina Lake and the Pasina River. Then the company embarked on a large cleanup and response procedure. Professional services were deployed, and we managed to collect all visible fuel in the form of water-fuel mixture from the river Ambarne and from all neighboring rivers in the flexible containers. And that was done in June, July. Then with help of professional services, we managed to pump and clean and separate this water-fuel mixture. And the fuel, as I mentioned before, is currently safely stored and in the future will be used for the power plants. The water tested as usable, reusable, and it got into the tailings dams. Upon the completion of the bulk cleanup in September, and according to the preliminary estimates, this fuel was split approximately 33% to 67% between soil and water. This slide shows the phases of our emergency response and the cleanup that the company undertook during this summer. And it also shows phase number 4, which is still going to happen in 21-22. During the phases number 1 and number 2, all visible, and we call it more than 90%, but it's all visible diesel fuel was removed from the river and in the form of water mixture and placed in the flexible containers. All contaminated soil in the vicinity of the power plant and this fuel farm was removed and stored in safe conditions in hangars. During these phases, almost 700 people and more than 300 units of equipment were utilized in order to do all the activities at the riverbanks and also at the power plant. During phase number 3, and that's actually took place by the end of September, approximately 35,000 cubic meters of water fuel mixture were repumped from the riverbanks, and it was separated, it was filtrated, and the fuel placed in the safe containers in a safe location, and the water was tested and pumped into the tailings dams. During the same period, there was a wide application of absorbents that was applied on the river banks, and all disseminated residue of spill was actually absorbed and collected and removed in a safe location. The ground, contaminated ground, is currently in a safe location, and the company is considering the most efficient way to deal with this ground. Most likely it is going to be a bioremediation. There was a consultancy company which estimated or determined outlined contaminated area and took numerous samples in order to understand the level of penetration and the content of the oil in the soil, in the ground. And there was a map produced that was presented to the government bodies. At the same time, the rehabilitation plan was developed and also by now presented to the government committee in order for approval. Once approved, this plan is going to be implemented during this next phase. And obviously it's going to be again about installation of the bones on the river once the ice melted. Then it will be continuous sampling of the water. It will be careful washing of the river banks, continuous sampling of the ground in the vicinity, and other methods that would be prescribed by the rehabilitation plan. Next slide showing the pictures taken in the vicinity of power plant number 3. And as I mentioned before, all contaminated ground was removed and it was replaced. And even you can see the grass was seeded and it was quite successful. Also, this slide shows the big numbers of the absorbents used during this campaign in order to clean these residues in the riverbanks, in the soil. And all this been collected carefully and stored in a safe location. and company is considering currently the most safest and most efficient way to deal with this. The independent board of directors of the company secured services from the consultancy company called ERM to provide their own view on the root causes of the incident, the provide assessment of the response undertaken by the company, as well as recommendations for the further risk assessments and the deal with the infrastructure. According to their report, there were several issues identified, and the first one being failure in a 1981 design, 1984 construction, and piles were shorter and not installed into the bedrock. The second one, they considered permafrost melting. Third one, insufficient specific monitoring, foundation and permafrost. Then they also mentioned insufficient bond and tertiary containment measures, compliance over the risk management, meaning that the company relies mostly on the prescribed by the government measures, and the company should also strict on their risk assessment procedures. And in line with this inadequate risk assessment of the particular fuel tank, the risk was identified, but risk was never linked to the foundation failure, and therefore it was taken lightly, saying there could be a leakage, but this leakage is manageable. Insufficient resource for immediate emergency response, and which is true. The company didn't have sufficient resource to deal with this kind of failure of the tank. Starting in June this year, company already embarked on several measures to eliminate this happening in the future. First of all, we've done emergency inspection of all our tanks at all our fuel farms. All suspect tanks been stopped and emptied. We also measured all our bound walls and redone our simulation and all the calculations in line with the most difficult event, most severe event. Those bound walls that were not in line with this calculation were marked, and currently the Design Institute is working on the particular designs, and the reconstruction of those bound walls is currently taking place and is going to go during 2021. Also, we considered that our permafrost monitoring system or infrastructure monitoring system in Norilsk was not quite sufficient. It was mostly based on the prescribed measures. It's a visual examinations and normal regular survey checks of the leveling of, for example, these fuel tanks. And in fact, we considered to build real-time monitoring system, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. Also, we are dealing with the risk assessments. All our risk assessment logs and risks related to the fuel farms, to the hazardous substances being reviewed, and additional measures were put in place in order to stop and eliminate this kind of happening in the future. All the prescribed emergency plans for the fuel farms, and those plans are prescribed by the government. They've been reviewed and currently being reassessed by the government body. And as I mentioned before, in those calculations now we took the most severe case of rupture of those, the diesel tanks, in order to eliminate any leakage all over the bound walls. But the most important, the underpinning all of this is the fact that if all piles have been installed as designed into the bedrock, this failure would not have happened. This is the conclusion from the consultancy report.
On May 29, 2020, a damage to the reservoir led to the leakage of 21,000 tons of diesel fuel at HPP3 in Norilsk. The incident did not affect power and water supply at Norilsk Industrial Region. Norilsk Nickel launched the cleanup of the incident immediately. the cleanup works were carried out 24/7. The Emercom Ministry, the Marine Rescue Service, and Russian leading oil and gas majors Transneft and Gazpromneft sent their teams and equipment to help Nornikel to clean up the diesel spill. The cleanup program included excavation of the contaminated soil, pumping out the fuel leaked into the HPP3 site, installation of containment booms, deployment of portable tanks for the collection of water-fuel mixture, treatment of the impacted river's coastline with sorbents, daily monitoring of the water surface of the Ambernaya River and Lake Pasino. On June 19th, the first phases of the cleanup were completed. More than 90% of the spilled fuel was collected. Over 32,000 cubic meters of fuel-water mixture was collected. The water-fuel mixture was put for temporary storage into temporary tanks. All the soil was transported to secure hangars. The spread of oil products into Lake Pasino was prevented. The cleanup was a successful joint effort of all the parties involved. At the peak of the cleanup activities, there were over 700 people and more than 300 equipment units involved. The number of containment booms on the Ambernaya River and its tributaries amounted to 110 lines. Representatives of the local indigenous peoples visited the spill site, examined the impacted area and cleanup operations, and highly appreciated the work of the joint team. The third phase of the cleanup program started in July. Temporary pipelines for pumping the water-fuel mixture from the Ambernaya River to the temporary storage area at the Lebyezhai tailings dump was built. By September 30th, 34.5 thousand cubic meters of water-fuel mixture was collected. At the Ambernaya River, a total of 423,000 square meters of territory were treated with sorbents. 351 tons of used sorbent were collected. About 190,000 tons of contaminated soil have been collected in special hangars with a roof and concrete floor. The pumping of the collected water-fuel mixture to the technological site for further separation was completed. The impacted area after the contaminated soil is removed will be planted with perennial grasses adapted to severe northern climate. After the incident, the company has launched a major reevaluation of risk management at operating assets. A detailed program aiming at the improvement of industrial safety of the operating facilities was developed. An emergency technical inspection of all the industrial buildings and structures was launched. Anti-corrosion treatment of fuel tanks, upgrade of containment systems, and bund walls was carried out. Additional capital investments towards an upgrade of the industrial safety of the energy infrastructure have been announced. Most of the cleanup has been completed. The area rehabilitation will continue in 2021 and beyond, as long as will be required to fully remediate the environmental impact of the incident at HPP3.
This slide deals with the specific points of our risk mitigation program. And I mentioned already about reassessment of all our fuel farms, and also I mentioned about the permafrost and infrastructure monitoring system. In July this year, we secured services from the Russian space monitoring company called Sovzond. And since then, we've been collecting all the images of the large Norilsk area. And as soon as we get enough statistics, right, we'll be able to identify areas that got the some deformation. And this system is going to be utilized in 2021 and it's going to create, the base for further work of the system and identification of most dangerous or most risky areas. The second major element of the risk monitoring program is the real-time infrastructure and the permafrost monitoring system, which is going to be based on the satellite images, on the strain gauges, and also on the information from the temperature monitoring system. All this information is going to provide necessary information in order to recalculate foundations and compare them with the design parameters in order to provide necessary warnings for the company. And the third element of this mitigation program, which is mentioned on this slide, is really a large-scale upgrade to our infrastructure, predominantly energy infrastructure. Approximately additional 100 billion rubles investments announced over 2020-2024, which is going to be deployed in the modernization and improvement of industrial safety of energy infrastructure at Taimyr Peninsula. And these investments will include a broad range of projects related to replacements of the equipment at the power plants, pipelines, gas pipelines, and the modernization of the fuel tanks. The real-time monitoring system, which I mentioned before, is going to provide also broader information. And this information about the conditions of permafrost in a larger Norilsk area, which is going to allow scientists to understand what's really happened with the global warming and the conditions of the infrastructure in the most risky areas. And the last slide in this block talks about the way we deal with these incidents. And it's really about full information transparency. We use different ways of convey this information. And we use special lives updates at our company site and via the social media. We use ad hoc investors' call and communications. It's regular IR disclosures and board updates, and also regular board reviews of the environmental matters held in June, September. In our dealings with the incidents, we managed to utilize best industry practices during the response, cleanup, and for the future rehabilitation of the contaminated areas. We managed to secure services from the best scientists in order to assess situation and provide necessary recommendations for the rehabilitation. 2 documents were prepared during the same period. The first one is a detailed action plan for further improvements in our safety practices within the company. It was developed and presented to the Rostechnadzor, Russian agency on the technical supervision. And the second document is the rehabilitation plan, which is currently complete and presented for approval to the government bodies.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a newly appointed Senior Vice President for Sustainable Development, I want to reiterate our commitment to responsible business practices. As you may already know, in response to recent, very unfortunate environmental incidents, we have completely revamped our ESG management. On the environmental side, we have developed the holistic strategy, adding to air, which was our historical focus, also strategies in other key areas of environmental management. We continue to execute our desulfurization programs and confirm both its timing and targets despite challenges posed by coronavirus pandemic. In addition to that, we prepared a climate change strategy, and I will give a bit more details about it later in the presentation. We have also decided to launch the cleanup of the legacy environmental impact. Needless to say that full rehabilitation of the recent environmental incidents remain our priority. On social front, we continued our unwavering efforts to enhance occupational health at our facilities. We have maintained our lost time injury frequency rate at a level significantly below the global industry average, and we spared no effort to achieve our priority goal to zero work-related fatalities. We have expanded our charity and social initiatives, having extended support to local communities and indigenous peoples. And of course, we provided large-scale support to regional healthcare and employees to mitigate COVID-19 impact. And last but not least is governance. We introduced a new corporate governance structure in order to address more efficiently environmental risks. We revamped environmental oversight, risk management and monitoring, and developed a roadmap aiming to bridge the gaps in our current business model against best international practices. Now, let me walk you through each of these topics in more detail. Next slide, please. Building on some of our flagship environmental projects, such as Sulfur Program 2.0, we have developed a holistic environmental strategy that includes water stewardship, responsible land use, tailings and waste management, and biodiversity management. We're currently developing detailed program for each of these subjects, setting specific targets to deliver. We will be actively exploring available clean tech solutions where this will be applicable. Already, we have some initiatives in our pipeline. We understand how important this is to our stakeholders and plan to maintain full transparency and open dialogue as usual. Next slide, please. Climate change has got on the top of the global agenda. We at Norilsk Nickel, as you may appreciate, also had a bit of steep learning curve about the challenge this summer. As you know, we have one of the lowest absolute levels of greenhouse gas emissions among global mining majors, and we commit to maintain absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions from operations below 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. We also intend to keep our emissions per ton of nickel equivalent in the bottom quartile of global metals and mining industry GHG intensity curve. We estimate that International Energy Agency Sustainable Development Scenario for the global carbon dioxide emissions is net neutral or positive to our commodity basket. I would like to remind you that our metal basket perfectly fits the low carbon future, as both nickel and copper are essential metals for transition to green mobility, whereas our platinum group metals will be essential to support hybridization of cars and adoption of fuel cells. At the same time, we understand that climate change is not only an opportunity for us, but also a risk. Given most of our business is in the Arctic, we take climate change risks very seriously, and right now are developing an advanced monitoring system of industrial and municipal foundations based on permafrost in the Norilsk industrial area. Next slide, please. Let us also look at the climate change issue from the broader country-specific angle. Russia has already done a remarkable job in reducing its carbon footprint. Since 1990, our total CO2 emissions decreased 27%, and despite solid economic growth in the last 20 years, it remained practically unchanged. That means that our country is fully on track to reach targets set up in Paris Agreement, and Russia is also a leader in renewable energy, having 17% of its electricity generated by carbon-neutral sources. Norilsk nickel carbon emissions were down over 70% since 2010, as our company thoroughly introduced energy-efficient initiatives and substituted coal and diesel with hydro and natural gas in its energy consumption. Next slide, please. This slide shows that we rank the lowest, both in terms of absolute, but also relative carbon emissions against our peers. Norilsk Scope 1 and 2 footprints is almost 50% lower as compared to our peers, given very high share of renewables in our electric power consumption. It's close to 50% of power consumption. Our Scope 3 emissions are almost negligible in comparison to peers, as we are the only large diversified miner that doesn't have any of the bulk commodities in its portfolio. Moving on to the next slide, since 2013, the company reduced its Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gases emissions by 16%, and we plan to keep our Scope 1 and 2 emissions at the current level by 2030, despite approximately 30% increase in metals output and the launch of energy-intensive sulfur program 2.0, which should reduce our sulfur dioxide emissions in Norilsk by 10 times by year 2025. In the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that sustainable development are not just hollow buzzwords to us, and our projects in this area have tangible targets. Air pollution reduction programs, including what we call sulfur program at Polar Division, have a combined budget of $3.6 billion, making them the largest environmental project in Russia. Water stewardship is something we didn't talk about much previously. Nevertheless, I would like to highlight that we rank pretty well against our competitors in terms of some of the standard benchmarks. For instance, we already have a well above average proportion of water being recycled and reused. Overall, we plan to invest over $1 billion in new water treatment facilities, technical solutions, and remediation of pollution from environmental incidents while keeping recycled water ratio at almost 90%. Moving to next slide. Maintaining safe operations of tailings facilities and minimizing environmental impact of mineral and non-mineral waste is another important issue for us. We plan to build mass balance model for waste management and prepare for self-assessment under global tailings standard of ICMM. Restoration of disturbed land, including legacy damage from the Soviet period, has also become a priority and will require about $800 million of capex in upcoming years. Biodiversity management is not just limited to remediation following recent environmental incidents, but includes the launch of regular monitoring of impacts on wildlife and increased support for nature reserves. I must mention that, as you may know, we have commissioned a number of independent impact assessments this year, including what is called Great Norilsk Expedition by leading Russian environmental scientists. The findings and recommendations from these assessments will be used to design action plans and programs. On the next slide, I would like to elaborate a little bit more on the collection of legacy waste and land reclamation. I think those of you who have been to Norilsk couldn't help noticing abandoned buildings, scrap metal along the roads, and other traces of production activity. We plan to clean it up in the next 10 years and have already committed over $600 million for the program. That includes collection and recycling of scrap metal, dismantling of buildings, and sanitary cleaning of the territory in Norilsk. Now, Great Norilsk Expedition. I have already mentioned that Great Norilsk Expedition was one of the important independent studies which we commissioned this year. It was designed as an independent assessment of our impact on environment and biodiversity in the Norilsk area. The expedition was organized by Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Science and was comprised of more than 30 scientists from 14 research institutions, which during their 6-week-long field work collected several thousand samples of water, soil, and living organisms and conducted various measurements in the Taimyr Peninsula. Now the data is being analyzed with a report planned by this year end. The expedition is expected to provide recommendations on sustainable and safe economic development in the Arctic environment and to provide the company with solutions to address local environmental issues, and also we expect advices regarding the most efficient remediation of the area impacted by the recent fuel spill. We have prepared a short video about the expedition and want to show it to you now.
Norilsk Nickel commenced the updating of its environmental strategy. It includes a number of measures to combat climate change, ensure water, air and soil purification. The measures also include waste and tailings management, as well as recovery of biodiversity. The company is building partnership with the scientific community in order to elaborate new high-quality solutions and business practices. The Great Norilsk Expedition started in July 2020. It was a large-scale study, unprecedented in the past 20 years. The expedition appeared to be a unique example of interaction between big business and science in order to establish a new model of sustainable economic development in the Arctic. 14 research centers of the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences joined the extensive program of studying the territories of Taimyr and Norilsk Industrial Region. The expedition was aimed at professional assessment of the consequences of the May 29th incident and development of recommendations on environmental protection, restoration of biodiversity, and climate change prevention. The field stage of the expedition lasted until September. The expedition and subsequent laboratory studies involved over 100 researchers. The research in the field stage of the expedition was conducted in 5 areas: terrestrial ecosystems, hydrobiology, permafrost soils, geophysics, geochronology. Within a month, the explorers covered over 1,500 kilometers. During the fieldwork, the scientists examined 35 areas of special interest. They took measurements, collected thousands of samples, the flora and fauna of the Taimyr Peninsula, and studies the state of permafrost. The mobile units of the expedition explored 6 rivers, 2 lakes, as well as the territory along the coast of the Kara Sea. During the Great Norilsk expedition, 2,000 samples weighing more than 500 kilograms were taken and preserved. In December, Norilsk Nickel will receive the final report. It will serve as a scientifically grounded basis for the corporate programs and goals related to environmental protection, climate change, and other aspects of sustainable development. SBRAS will present recommendations on the formation of approaches to economic management in the Arctic. Norilsk Nickel aims at shaping new quality production and an advanced ESG-focused corporate culture. Thus, it sees potential for further cooperation with scientific centers regarding the key issues of sustainable development of the Arctic. The company signed a long-term cooperation agreement with the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. In the future, the parties plan to continue research on a regular basis.
Now let us move to the social strategy that encompasses 4 main areas: employees, local communities, indigenous people, as well as charity and sponsorships. I'm quite proud to say that we are ranked as #1 employer amongst 50 largest Russian companies by Forbes Russia, which we believe has been achieved not just due to our very competitive salaries and generous social package, but is reflected of our overall strong focus towards the well-being of our employees. We offer them health and vacation compensation, co-funded pension plans, and housing programs. We have been constantly supporting local communities through a number of urban development, sport, and healthcare projects, and continue to do so. We have also a strong long-term engagement with indigenous people, and I would like to elaborate on it a bit more on the next slide. An independent ethnographic expedition to the Taimyr Peninsula was organized this summer to survey local indigenous communities on a broad number of different issues and also estimate an impact on their habitat from the recent environmental incidents. The expedition involved over 100 interviews with 5 local indigenous ethnic groups, including Dolgans, Nenets, Evenks, Ents, and the Ganasans. Importantly, about 670 local residents have been identified as being potentially impacted. However, none of the indigenous people settlements have been found to be impacted by the incident, as their traditional fishing points are located much further downstream. The results of the survey were used as a foundation for a new long-term cooperation agreement between Norilsk Nickel and indigenous peoples of the Russia's north. Next slide. I want to highlight that close cooperation with local indigenous communities is among strong social legacies of Nорникель in its area of operations. Our traditional support has historically included a variety of programs, including air transportation, the procurement of building materials and diesel fuel, as well as cultural events, celebrations, and ad hoc support. In September this year, we signed a new cooperation agreement with 3 organizations representing over 90% of the indigenous population of the Russia's north, and pretty much most of the indigenous people residing in the Taimyr Peninsula. We estimate the company's investment under this agreement at 2 billion rubles. The agreement was based on the results of the ethnological expedition that I described earlier, and includes over 40 specific initiatives which have been developed jointly with local indigenous people. These include things like construction of workshops for reindeer and fish processing, purchase of refrigeration units, construction of an ethical complex with workshops for fur processing, subsidies for helicopter transportation, targeted training for professions in demand at Nornikel, and publishing of textbooks in indigenous languages. Please have a look at one more video related to this topic.
Today, several indigenous peoples live at the Taimyr Peninsula, leading their traditional life. These are the Dolgans, Ninets, Inganizans, Enets, and Evenks. In Murmansk region, located at the Kola Peninsula, is the habitat of the Sami. About 1,200 Evenks live to the north of Trans-Baikal territory. Traditionally, the northern peoples have been associated with reindeer breeding, hunting, and fishing. For over 50 years, the company has been building systemic relationship with indigenous ethnicities, supporting their traditional occupations, and desire to preserve their traditional lifestyles. Norilsk Nickel has initiated a number of projects to maintain and develop folk living and crafts. The indigenous villages receive comprehensive support, which includes building houses, hospitals, nursery schools, and sports centers. The corporate funds are allocated for the purchase construction materials, computers, sports equipment, and more. The total amount of the expenses in the last 3 years, from 2018 to 2020, amounted to $4.5 million, 277 million rubles. National holidays and festivals of indigenous peoples are actively supported. These measures contribute to the preservation of national traditions, support clan communities, and give them a feeling of confidence in the future. In the summer of 2020, the Project Office of the Development of the Arctic conducted a comprehensive ethno-environmental examination. Independent experts assessed the damage to the natural habitats of indigenous communities caused by the fuel spill. In September, Norilsk Nickel signed cooperation agreements with 3 organizations representing the indigenous peoples of Russia, including Taimyr indigenous peoples. In course of mutual cooperation, the company developed a comprehensive 5-year support program for the total of 2 billion rubles. The new program, scheduled up to 2024, includes a wide range of initiatives aimed at protection of the natural habitat and support of the traditional activities typical for the indigenous peoples. Projects to support the traditional activities of the indigenous peoples of Taimyr, housing projects, medical projects, educational and cultural initiatives, sports and infrastructure projects, tourism, development and support projects through newly established and currently operating funds. The North touches upon each of us. Norilsk Nickel supports small ethnicities and places a priority on indigenous projects.
Next slide, please. One of the most acute challenges this year, not just to our company, but globally, was the coronavirus pandemic. We have launched prompt and quite comprehensive response aiming at the mitigation of its impact on our operations, employees, and local communities. All office employees have been transitioned to working from home with 100% of salaries maintained. All operating assets are supplied with individual protection gear, health monitoring devices with mandatory COVID-19 testing. The company also purchased medical supplies and equipment for local hospitals as needed and financed the expansion of local hospitals' capacity. We also supported small and medium-sized enterprises, providing rent holidays for them and provided ad hoc support to those who are in need. We estimate our COVID-related spending at about $120 million year to date. I should conclude that so far we have managed to keep this COVID impact on our operations under control having no material disruptions to our operations. Next slide. In response to new challenges, we have promptly revamped our organizational structure and corporate governance mechanisms. The board of directors decided to put environmental matters under a greater scrutiny and established an environmental task team comprised solely of independent directors and led by the board chairman. A new management risk committee chaired by the company's president has been set up to get a better control over environmental risks internally. New position of a senior vice president for sustainable development was established, as well as 3 new departments responsible for environmental risk management and independent internal oversight of ecological matters, design of a real-time ecological monitoring system, as well as adaptation of best global ESG practices. Next slide. On this slide, we show a summary of how our ESG performance is assessed by independent ESG rating agencies. Over the past several years, we have managed to deliver quite steady and significant improvement in all leading ESG rankings. Expectedly, the diesel spill incident has had some negative impact on some of the ratings, but we hope that it has not derailed us from the trend. We remain very committed to continue delivering further rating upgrades, and we're hoping that the new comprehensive strategy I have just outlined, alongside with some of the concrete initiatives we are planning to implement in the coming year, should help us to deliver such improvements. Now, in conclusion, I would like to highlight some of the initiatives which have already been launched to advance our agenda towards best international ESG practices. They include the calculated and disclosed our Scope 1 and 2 emissions under GHG protocol, as well as calculated and had third-party assurance of our Scope 3 carbon emissions. This year, we started to disclose information to CDP on air and water and responded to investors' queries, having published special reports on our tailing dams management and indigenous people. For the next year, we are planning to set additional environmental 2030 targets, development of key initiatives, and capital investment plans. Also, expand management ESG KPIs to include environmental performance. We will continue with the execution of sulfur program in Norilsk and would launch the cleanup of legacy pollution in Norilsk. We shall advance on the full rehabilitation of the impacted environment following the diesel spill incident. Our priority would be design and rollout of permafrost-based foundations in Norilsk. We also plan to submit applications to ICMM and IRMA, and we would prepare TCFD compliance roadmap. As you can see, the plans are quite ambitious, but I believe they are achievable, and next year we will be sharing with you the results of these initiatives. This concludes my portion of the presentation, and now I'm passing the floor to our Chief Operating Officer Sergei Dichenko. Thank you very much.
Which shows the outcome of the last strategic planning cycle. And the slide shows our potential to grow production rate from our mining operations to 32,000 tons per annum by 2030. And this is really based on the findings from our pre-feasibility studies and feasibility studies for the major mining operations. Some of them mentioned on these slides. This being Komsomolsky mine, Oktyabrski mine, and Taimursky mine. And the next slide talks about the Skalisty mine. And we've been informed in the previous sessions about the progress of this project. To date, we managed to commission additional capacity at that operation, another 200,000 tons per annum of high-grade ore, but the major construction is still going. We managed to complete shaft sinking operations, and our main shaft at the depths of 2,051 meters was completed during the last year. And we're busy equipping the next slide, which is going to be fully commissioned in 2021. Nevertheless, we started our lateral development, and to date, some 900 meters been already developed at 2 elevations connecting 2 shafts. Feasibility study is in progress, and that's going to design a mining operation with the production capacity of 2.4 million tons per annum, and it's going to become the deepest mine in Eurasia. The estimated capex for the period of 2021 to 2025 is approximately $7 million. Some update on the South Cluster project. It's the large-scale, long life, so 25 plus years. It's a brownfield asset at the bottom of the global PGM cost curve project. It's going to consist of open pit and underground operations. And the open pit is going to become 7 million tons per annum operation, and the underground in the future is going to become 4.5 million tons per annum operation. Feasibility study is complete, and it's been approved by the ecological authorities and currently undergoing the government approval. And the first pre-stripping took place, and we actually started it in 2019, and it's progressing well. And that indicates that the first ore is going to be mined in 2021. The next slide deals with the concentrate loading points. It's a part of our environmental program, and it's really about reducing the sulfur dioxide pollutions at the Kola Peninsula in the area of Nickel and Zapolarny. And according to our program, the nickel smelter is due for its closure by the end of this year. We had to re-engineer our concentrator in order to produce saleable or marketable concentrates. So this project is complete, and we reached our parameters with regards to the quality and quantity of the concentrate. And this concentrate is being currently shipped to our customers. So by the end of this year, we'll be ready to really shut the old smelter in nickel. The next project on the map of our transformation is the nickel refinery upgrade. If you remember, we informed you about the new technology refinery built at the Kola Peninsula in Monchegorsk. And we're pleased to announce that this refinery is complete, and the ramp up is ongoing. And we managed to achieve our targets with regards to the high quality nickel cathodes. And our task is to reach full capacity by 2022. And the last one, but not least, is a Bystrinsky project. And the Bystrinsky project is based on the ore reserve of 316 million tons, with the copper grade of 0.7, ferrum grade of 23, and the gold grade of 0.9 gram per ton. And a full ramp is achieved in second quarter 2020. And the table shows some of the performance indicators. So as you can see, 2020, we're going to achieve 10 million tons per annum processing rate, and we're going to get copper in concentrate close to 63,000 tons, gold and iron as per schedule. And the 21 indicates some growth in the copper in concentrate and the growth in the production of the iron ore concentrate. In 2015, company embarked on a technological breakthrough program. It's really about the moving towards the digital mining and processing. And our key achievements were, first of all, to digitize our environment, starting from the resource modeling, planning, scheduling, and execution. And in doing that, we managed to achieve all those goals. So in other words, all our resource base is currently in a 3D environment. All our designs and all our projects being done in a 3D environment, all planning done on the 3D plans, and we managed to install dispatch system with a short-term planning, which provides the real-time information from the underground operations, informing on the real performance of the equipment and people and the resource. This program is not complete. It's got second phase, and it's going to take us to the new horizons of the digitalization of our production environment. The current timing for the completion of this stage is 2024, and by that time, we're going to have first unmanned underground operation at the Skalisti mine. And all prerequisites are there. As I mentioned, digitized resource model, digitized planning, digitized execution, and now we're going to have remote operated or absolutely autonomous equipment, which is going to minimize presence of people on the ground. That's going to reduce safety, reduce hazards and unsafe conditions for the people on the ground.
Norilsk Nickel pursues a digitalization aimed at efficiency and performance growth, as well as guarantee of industrial safety. Norilsk Nickel has developed a strategy to improve operational efficiency of its production assets. All the projects are combined into the Technological Breakthrough Program. It covers the corporate divisions of the operating unit and includes all the production stages, from ore mining to metal production. The program will result in the formation of highly efficient, adaptive digital production with improved business processes. At present, the following goals have been achieved. All the mines have been equipped with radio communication and positioning systems. The system is enhancing and will soon allow to provide communication and data transmission at all mining areas. The major technological processes in the company are currently controlled from operation control centers located in the Polar Branch, Medvezi Ruchi, and Kola Mining and Metallurgical Company. The system operates in 18 production units. Improved planning and control over repair works, optimized timing and the budget for repairs. Introduction of metal balance, an advanced tracking program, became a major achievement. It allowed for detailed and fragmentary recording of metal-containing products at each production stage. Solutions for operational planning and mining operations monitoring are being implemented. A mining and geological information data system has been introduced at all the corporate divisions. The system ensures geological and mine surveying support of production. Introduction of the simulation modeling system is a major breakthrough. Norilsk Nickel also has a digital transformation program implemented by the company's digital laboratory. The laboratory is located in Skolkovo and is actively working on the search and creation of industrial prototypes of modern technologies. The laboratory and the Kola Mining and Metallurgical Company implement a project for monitoring copper-nickel concentrate by using artificial intelligence and machine vision. Works are underway to improve drones for video recording in the mine. These devices can improve work safety significantly. The complex is capable of autonomous high-quality 3D surveying. The exoskeleton design was ranked among the top 10 innovative products in the industry. The exoskeleton transfers up to 90% of physical activity from the back of a person to a metal frame. New technologies will change the industry irrevocably by eliminating human exposure to hazardous areas and giving birth to advanced industrial professions.
The next slide talks about the efficiency improvement program. And the cycle of the efficiency improvement program is going to be complete in 2020. We embarked on this program in 2017, and there was a toll call to improve our efficiency and reduce our expenditure by 21% each, so 7% per annum. So what we managed to achieve in a period of 2019-20, we managed to improve our production growth by close to 8% versus 20 versus 17. Labor productivity increased by close to 15% over this period. And we've got numerous initiatives that have been implemented, and what's the most precious that, the majority of the initiatives came from the shop floor, from the people of the company. And they've been implemented, and they're currently in the process of implementation. The next targets will be set for 2021, and then for the following period, 21 to 24. And company is busy devising these targets for each operation and for the entire company. This leads us to the production guidance slide for 2023. And we confirm our guidance for 2020. The year is nearly ended. And our production guidance for 21 and 22-23 are in line with the previous guidance. We're going to reduce slightly our nickel production, and that not because of the underperformance of our resource base and operations, it's mostly because of the capital repairs to our major furnaces, which is going to be done in 22-23. Therefore, you see slight reduction in the nickel output. The link to this is a slight reduction in the PGM production, because PGM linked to the nickel, and therefore you will see slight reduction in the PGM production. The slight reduction in the copper production is got two directions. It increases from the underground operations, but at the same time it's reduced by the amount which was produced from the additional resource bought by the company in 2015. My last slide talks about the strategic ambitions, and I've mentioned the strategic planning cycle, which we completed this year. And there is indication that our production output for nickel can grow as high as 250,000-270,000 tons per annum. We've got resource and capability to produce copper with an amount of close to 530,000 tons per annum, and obviously it's going to lead to the growth in the production of PGM group metals.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to continue by elaborating on what Mr. Potanin and my other colleagues already presented earlier today, and give you more details on how we see the strategy of the company, or how we call it the strategy of sustainable growth. In other words, our strategic framework can be summarized in one motto as more greener metals for a greener world. Let me briefly describe what we mean by each of these words. So more reflects our plans to increase production volumes within the next 10 years. To recap, we aim almost to double ore mining volumes in North division and increase production by our metals basket by 30-40%. Not only we plan to grow mining volumes, but also we envisage to significantly scale up and technologically upgrade our downstream footprint across the whole value chain. I will talk through the key projects in this section. The program would also include deep modernization and expansion of the supporting infrastructure, a key component of future operational resilience and security of supply. So that was more element. Now let me talk a little bit about greener metals element. As one of the largest metals and mining companies globally, we do recognize the increasing focus of various stakeholder groups on the topics of ESG and more specifically environment. Nornikel has been and remains fully committed to the principles of sustainability and puts this topic at the top of its strategic agenda. I believe this thesis was already well demonstrated by Mr. Bugrov, presenting our holistic ESG strategy. Let me, in my section, further substantiate this thesis by giving you an update on unprecedented environmental project, Sulfur Program 2.0, and our strategic position in climate change agenda, where maintaining one of the lowest carbon intensity in the industry should become another significant competitive advantage for Nornikel of the future. Now, the words for a greener world mean that we recognize the importance of our metals as enablers of the global transition to a cleaner and greener economy. In particular, in automotive industry, we do see a trend for acceleration of the transition by means of electrification and hybridization, and recognize the magnitude of impact these mega trends will have on our core markets in the long run. Anton Berlin will further elaborate today on this topic. The ability of Nornikel to tailor its production offering to the needs of new economy, ability to craft a unique value proposition for its customers of tomorrow, will be a crucial factor determining the competitiveness of our business in the future. So let me start with the more part of our strategic framework. Our potential and confirmed plans to grow in money have been already discussed in details in the previous section of the presentation. And building on that, let me elaborate on our downstream configuration plans. I would like to explain the major principles and the rationale that we pursue when we define the scope of the program and specific projects. First, our strategy is clearly focused on leveraging of the existing production sites as the most financially attractive, value-creating way for capacity expansion. Second, we certainly made sure that the entire future production value chain from ore to metal remains fully utilized and balanced, thus maximizing operational efficiency. Third, we selected certain processing technologies that will be fit for our unique polymetallic resource and product flows. Fourth, we put much emphasis to ensure that all new capacities are environmentally friendly and are packed into our environmental program. And last but not least, all projects are synchronized with the development and modernization of the supporting infrastructure, ensuring reliability of operations in the long run. This slide gives you a bird's eye view on our downstream development plans. As you can see from the chart, we target to upgrade almost all major assets in our portfolio to pave the way for scaled-up, balanced, modern, and green production value chain. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on this slide and rather cover specific projects further as we go through the presentation. Going through the production chain, I would like to start with enrichment, where we are progressing with the third stage upgrade of Talnach concentrator. The goal of the project is to match concentrating capacities of our Norilsk division with the growth in ore mining volumes, which will be mainly driven by the ramp-up of South Cluster project in the medium run. The project will result in 8 million tons of additional capacities that will utilize state-of-the-art technology, targeting to achieve 4 to 7% in incremental metal recoveries compared to traditional technology, or roughly 150 million positive impact on EBITDA. The construction works have started, project commissioning and ramp-up planned for 2023-2024. In addition to that, a complete revamp of Norilsk concentrator is also currently in scope. It's currently envisaged that the concentrator will be basically rebuilt with expansion by 3 million tons per annum. To sum up, 100% of our enrichment capacities in Norilsk division will be upgraded and expanded as a result of this program. Now, moving down the chain, let's talk on the plans to expand our Nickel Nadezhda smelter. We are talking about construction of the new third production line at the smelter. As a result of this project, the capacity of Nadezhda smelter, the world's largest sulfide nickel smelter already, will be increased by 30%, or 850,000 tons of concentrate. So the expansion would balance the growing concentrate volumes and provide for operational flexibility during shutdown maintenance. New line will be fully integrated into Sulfur Program 2.0. It will cost incremental 300 million capex to scale up ongoing projects. Big amount, But as mentioned before, we put as an absolute principle for all our expansion plans that environmental angle is paramount for their adoption. Preliminary studies have confirmed the fit of the project into Nadezhda smelter's footprint. The project is currently in design phase. Its commissioning is targeted for 2025. Moving further along the production chain, we plan to build a new copper refining hub on Kola instead of the existing obsolete copper line that is due to be phased out in 2021. The design of the project is based on the modern, environmentally friendly technology of roasting, leaching, electrowinning, and will expand refining capacity to 150,000 tons of copper compared to 75,000 capacity of the existing copper line. The project is envisaged to be launched in 2025. In the meantime, in 2022-2024, production flows will be redirected to Norilsk division with optionality of partial sales to third parties. The next slide gives you an overview of our strategic vision for the development of the company's nickel refining capacities that will include production sites in Russia and Finland. This is a very important element as it is at the forefront of new market developments. I mean transition of Class 1 nickel market into a new structure, first of all reflecting evolving battery materials industry and more demanding requirements of other segments. Our vision for a nickel refining footprint of the future targets full modernization, expansion by 20-30%, differentiated product offering and built-in flexibility for quick reaction to customer needs. To remind, we are not starting from the middle of the field. In the recent years, we have already spent over $400 million into Tank House 2 upgrade. Our new projects that should accomplish full upgrade of nickel refining are currently in scoping stage. More details will come next year. Last but not the least, all the upgrades of production assets that we have discussed today will go in parallel with the continued modernization of supporting energy infrastructure, an integral part of our business. To put things into perspective, we aim that over 60% of our energy assets will be fully renewed by 2030. The program is not a novelty. Since last several years, we have been talking about new investment cycle for infrastructure. Not only talking, but also successfully delivering on a number of projects, such as replacement of 6 power generating units at our hydropower plant, construction of 14 gas wells, upgrade of gas pipelines, etc., etc. Our plans for the next 5 years include installation of 5 brand new power generation units at thermal power plants, principal power grid modernization, and upgrade of gas upstream and midstream infrastructure. The estimated capex for the above-mentioned program is in excess of $4 billion for the next 5 years. And now, as we are done with the more element of the framework and getting to greener metals part, let me pause here and give you a quick recap of 3 major dimensions for our holistic environmental program. First, climate change, where we'll already have the industry-leading carbon footprint and target to secure our positions in the long term. Second, Sulfur Program 2.0, announced last year, which targets radical reduction of sulfur dioxide emissions in the regions of our operations. And third, broader ESG strategy, which has been presented today by Mr. Bugrov. I would like to draw your attention to the slide on the screen, where you may see the chart illustrating carbon dioxide emissions intensity curve for global nickel producers. I would like to note that this type of curve is a relatively new instrument for the mining industry, and the underlying methodology is still evolving. Still, 2 messages I wanted to convey here. First, this curve will become a particularly important tool for the economy of tomorrow, just as the traditional cost curve has become the golden standard for the mining industry of today. Second, being at the bottom of the global emission intensity curve, Nornikel could offer distinct value proposition for its customers and investors in the future. Combined with the global leadership on cost, Nornikel has a truly unique position vis-à-vis its peers. We view this competitive advantage as a factor of critical importance for our long-term strategy and set a target to sustain our positions in the first quartile of this curve. On this slide, you may see a strategic roadmap of Sulfur Program 2.0 that was announced last year. I'm happy that our disclosure shifts from plans to actions and results. The first milestone is achieved. We have radically reduced emissions in Nickel town at Russia-Norway border zone. Target of 50% reduction should be accomplished in this year. We are on track with the plan to principally solve SO2 emission problem for Kola division in next year. The next historical milestone will be in 2023, when phase 1 of the sulfur capturing project in Norilsk division will be completed. By 2025, we plan to launch the facilities to capture gases at copper smelter, achieving total reduction in emissions of 90%, or 10 times on the regional level. Our strategic aspiration for emissions reduction remains the same, more than 95%, or more than 20 times. On the next slide, you may see additional details on the current construction status of key projects of the Sulfur Program 2.0 in Norilsk division. The flagship project at Nadezhda smelter, which is shown on the background photo, will include capturing acid neutralization facilities and associated infrastructure. Over 85% of contracts are now legally binding. The piling steelworks and dam raising are ongoing. The approved project design allows for the expansion of the smelter that has been discussed earlier today. At the copper plant, reconstruction of gas cleaning unit has been initiated. Over 45% contracts are now legally binding. Basic engineering and design for phase 2 of the sulfur program is in progress. Construction start is scheduled for the second half of 2021. The updated capex estimate for the program stands at $3.6 billion. Slight change from the previous guidance, reflecting two offsetting factors: additional capacity for the third line at Nadezhda smelter and ruble depreciation. I will make a pause here for a short video about the program.
Norilsk Nickel has launched the construction works of the Phase 1 of the sulfur program at Nadezhda smelter and the copper plant. The main purpose of the sulfur program is to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions drastically. By 2023, when the sulfur construction project at Nadezhda smelter is completed, emissions will reduce approximately by 50%. By 2025, upon the completion of the project at the copper plant, emissions in Norilsk will decrease by 90%. At the same time, the technological processes at Nadezhda smelter and the copper plant will be upgraded. Today, a complex of modular houses for shift workers is being assembled in Khairkhan, in the immediate proximity of Nadezhda smelter. The construction project of the temporary residential complex is implemented in 2 stages. At the first stage, a residential facility for 400 beds will be put into operation. The second stage will add another 600 beds. In total, 6 dormitories will be built for 1,000 beds. In parallel with this, the old foundations are dismantled, and new foundations are constructed in the territory of the future, the sulfuric acid production site. Pits are being excavated for the sulfuric acid warehouse, the building for production of limestone milk, and the site for limestone receiving, storing, and grinding. The works are being performed on the area of 73,000 square meters. Site parameters: the width is 96 meters, the length is 216 meters, the height is 44 meters. The construction of the building will require up to 17,000 cubic meters of concrete and up to 7,000 tons of steel structures. The sulfuric acid neutralization project at Nadezhda smelter is the flagship part of the sulfur program. The construction will result in a scalable production complex, the basis for subsequent stages of the sulfur program planned for implementation at all smelting facilities of Norilsk region.
As we already highlighted many times, implementation of our strategy requires principal uplift in investment and, practically speaking, construction activity. We also frankly admitted that this represents a challenge for us, given scarcity of resources in the region. Let me briefly share how we are tackling this challenge. There are 2 streams that are both critical: external and internal. In the external perimeter, we proactively foster a competitive and quality contractors market in Norilsk region. We do this by developing infrastructure that would lower barriers for entry for new players. For example, in this year, we built or renovated accommodation facilities for almost 4,000 fly-in contractor employees. This number will further grow in the next year. We further develop and apply contracting models that would make engagement in Norilsk for quality contractors attractive and less risky, as they ensure long-term horizon and transparency of economics. In internal perimeter, we go the path that many global industrial houses have already been through by shaping major projects function in the organization and making sure that this function is adequately resourced. Over 1,000 employees will be staffed in project offices in the beginning of 2021. Certainly, as our CEO already mentioned, COVID situation didn't help us this year. The pace of rollout was below our plan, especially in the first half of the year, and we'll do our best to come back on track in 2021. Having said this, we reiterate our CapEx guidance for 2021 onwards. In our current assessment, the add-ons to our investment program, which we highlighted in this presentation, will be offset by ruble depreciation, so we keep the same indication in dollar terms. We aim to increase our investment spend to the peak level of $3.5 to $4 billion per year. As you can see on the graph, over half of this amount will go into environmental and growth projects, thus reflecting in numbers more and greener elements of our strategic framework. The topic of the greener world will be covered by our head of marketing, Anton Berlin, later today. And now, let me pass the floor to Sergey Malyshev, our Chief Financial Officer.
I would like to start with some metrics that are indicative of our current financial standing as well as long-run performance. First, our margins have been in 50% plus territory over the last years, which is due to low cash cost and generally favorable market conditions. Second, there has been a large shift in our revenue mix from nickel to palladium, so much that palladium now accounts for almost half of metal sales. Third, our cash flow generation has been good in recent years, thanks to high EBITDA margin and moderate capex. Our balance sheet has been consistently strong through the cycle, and we expect to maintain conservative leverage policy going forward. Our net debt EBITDA ratio was last reported at 1.2 times. Our investment grade rating were affirmed by all major agencies this year. Finally, our dividend yield has been one of the highest in the industry, with returns to shareholders prescribed in the agreement between major owners. In my presentation, I will elaborate on some of these topics. I will also touch upon more function-specific themes, such as information technology and recent change in taxation. As I said, our margins were quite strong in the recent years. In addition to market conditions, margins were supported by good cost control and increases in production. In particular, our cash cost per ton of nickel equivalent remained broadly stable throughout the last 3 years, recording a 4% decline in dollar terms. This reflects internal work on cost containment as well as depreciation of the Russian ruble to some extent. Our revenue mix has seen a stable substitution of nickel by palladium. This is mostly a result of palladium's spectacular price performance. It has more than tripled in value since 2013, while nickel traded sideways. In addition to that, we have phased out low margin refining of third-party nickel, reducing headline volumes of nickel produced. We believe that our metals mix is quite balanced as it combines metals with exposure to both consumer demand and capital investments. Precious metals have also benefited from financial investment. Moving from recent financials to medium-term outlook, the markets remain broadly supportive for our profitability and balance sheet. Equity and credit analysts generally believe that we will be able to maintain solid credit profile through 2022. As I mentioned, our credit ratings were affirmed this year. As you know, the agreement by our major shareholders is set to expire in 2022. Hence, the dividend for 2021, payable in 2022, is going to be the last made in accordance with the agreement and the EBITDA-based formula. As we ramp up our capex spending, we generally expect a more balanced approach to dividend payouts from 2023 onwards. Our credit strength is underpinned by a record low average cost of debt, just 2.9% as of today. This is a result of landmark financing deals we have closed in 2020. We issued a 5-year Eurobond priced at 2.55%, a record low coupon rate for Russian issuers. Back in January, we signed a $4.15 billion syndicated facility priced at just 140 basis points over LIBOR. Our liquidity remains exceptionally strong, and as you can see, the debt prepayment schedule is quite comfortable. Recent news on the increase in mineral extraction tax has caught the attention of many investors, so it's worth to look at the issue in more detail. For our company, the MAT is levied on the volume of the ore mined. The MAT rate is different from site to site. For our major mines in Norilsk region, the rate currently stands at 730 rubles. That's about $10 per ton mined. Now, the government has enacted a 3.5 times MAT hike throughout a number of mining and fertilizer subsectors. As a producer of base metals and PGMs, we are affected by this hike. For example, the rate for Norilsk mines is expected to go from $10 to $35 a ton, starting from 1st of January. We estimate that after the MAT hike is implemented, our royalty-related payouts would stand at roughly 4.4% of revenue. Our analysis of P Group financials indicates that the average royalty payout for global diversified managers is roughly 4.6%. So one could argue that our royalty regime is about to become similar to the P Group. The hike will reduce our EBITDA margin by about 3 percentage points. We also expect a certain adverse impact on the profitability of our upstream projects. Nevertheless, IRRs of all major mining projects in the Norilsk division are expected to stay comfortably above our 20% threshold. In our previous investor updates, we highlighted the long-running effort to bring our IT infrastructure and systems to industry's leading standards. The COVID-19 pandemic was an important test for our renewed IT platform. We were happy to see that our infrastructure performed well under stress and allowing us to maintain full business continuity. Within 2 weeks, we implemented work from home for over 10,000 office employees. Our shared service center was instrumental in enabling the smooth operation of back office functions. Finally, I'd like to touch on the key sensitivities. As you know, the majority of our costs are ruble denominated, so we are quite exposed to changes in exchange rate. Given that palladium is now by far the largest contributor to our revenue, our EBITDA is highly sensitive to change in the palladium price. A 10% change in price is equivalent to about $550 million of EBITDA. Our sensitivity to nickel and copper prices is lower, with 10% change in price equivalent to roughly $300 million. Now let me pass the floor to Anton Berlin.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. The pandemic obviously had a negative effect on our markets, although the effect was somewhat different in scale for different metals. The lockdowns globally have affected supply. We have seen companies stopping mining. Processing was mostly unaffected on a global scale. PGMs have experienced the biggest decline because it was coupled not only with the lockdowns but also with technical issues that mining companies have experienced. Nickel supply, on the other hand, was actually increasing. This is due to growing production of nickel pig iron (NPI) in Indonesia, and the increase in this output actually outweighed the decline elsewhere globally. Next slide. The macroeconomic environment looks promising, obviously, with all the negative effects we've had in 2020. Nevertheless, the outlook is more optimistic, and we're looking towards a very strong recovery in the next 6 months, in the first half of 2021, and then further recovery for the rest of 2021. We do see improvements in demand. They are better than the worst part of 2020, but still we are on the path to recovery. It will take some time, but we believe that the trend is optimistic. There's quite a way to go until pre-crisis levels, but hopefully we'll get there by 2022. Next slide. Industrial production is a smaller part of the global economy. So when we look at GDP, it's a bit deceiving. We have to look into industrial production predominantly to see what's happening to the consumption of the metals as the basic industry. We have seen a very strong recovery in China, and it is important for metals consumption as China consumes the vast majority of our metals, for many of them more than 50%, and in any case, it is the biggest consuming country for the full metal basket. The Chinese economy was the first one to experience the lockdown, and thus they were the first one out of the lockdown, so their recovery started quicker than anywhere else, and we have seen a very strong growth. We have seen growth in stainless steel sector, although coupled with a somewhat increase in the inventories, and we see a changing pattern in the metals buying when clients still consuming significant volumes, but refraining from signing long-term contracts, more looking towards short-term deals and spots. Next slide. If we take a bird's eye view on our markets, obviously 2020 is a very disappointing year, but nevertheless, we believe we're almost over the crisis we've had. Looking forward, things would improve gradually. This has moved most of the markets into a surplus. For nickel, we were expecting initially a balanced market, but the weak demand coupled with growth of supply have created a sizable surplus in this market in excess of 100,000 tons. We do expect this surplus to stay on in 2022 and 2021, but at lesser amounts. On the copper side, we have a statistical surplus, but given the size of the market, we believe this to be immaterial and essentially the market being rather balanced. In the PGM space, the negative effect of the pandemic on the demand was coupled with lower production. This is due to technical challenges that happened in South Africa and the smelt capacity being restricted. So actually, the palladium market, after 10 years of deficit, stays in a smaller deficit, which is manageable, and next year might be a balanced market. On the platinum side, given the drop in production this year, it's roughly balanced, but moving to next year, we do expect a sizable surplus. However, we should say that very likely a substantial part of the surplus would be absorbed by investment demand, as this has happened in prior years. In the next slide, if we focus on the nickel market, the biggest illustration for the surplus is the LME inventories. They have gone up, and there is quite a drastic change in the level of inventories. This has to do with a drawdown that happened in 2019, around 100,000 tons, that were actually back this year, 2020, with interest, and this has created a stockpile which is close to average numbers that we have seen historically, but certainly much lower than the peak we had a few years ago of over 500,000 tons. Nevertheless, this stockpile is what we see as typical for the nickel market, and we don't see it as a major distortion to the market, and this has been confirmed by stronger nickel prices as the expectations that this metal will be in demand. Next slide. Nickel demand is dominated by stainless. It consumes roughly 3/4 of the metal, and over 50% of stainless steel are produced in China, so thus this market is very much China-centric. We also see very sizable growth of stainless production in Indonesia, so these two countries together drive the stainless steel market. Unfortunately for us, the development of nickel supply in the last 10 years is moving in favor of stainless grade material, either nickel pig iron, NPI, or ferronickel. This increased supply somewhat displaces the class 1 nickel from the stainless steel sector, so the growth that goes in steel does not necessarily have a reflection on the nickel cathode market that we deal with. So the surplus this year has been shifted towards class 1 nickel, and the demand for it was much weaker than the average numbers for the total nickel market and nickel units. We believe that some of the growth was put into inventory, so the melting output is somewhat exceeding demand, but nevertheless we see this as an encouraging sign, and the market is restoring itself. The rest of the world do not look this impressive. There has been a very sizable decline, but because of the significant share of China and Indonesia in the total production, the global numbers look not as depressing. Next slide. Batteries are the second most important sector of demand for nickel. It's the most hype one and the most promising one. We strongly believe that batteries will continue to take a bigger share of the total nickel demand, and in the next few years will become second to stainless. There is a very big driver behind this, climate change, air pollution, and China has been the leader until recently, but Europe is very ambitious to be at par with China. There are substantial government-supported programs to encourage use of electrified vehicles, electrified meaning battery electric, as well as hybrids. There are some concerns for the nickel demand with the use of LFP batteries, but in our view, this would not be a major distortion to the future nickel consumption. There will be a greater diversity of the types of batteries used in this industry. Next slide. We believe that the nickel market will keep the surplus next year, although it will be less. We expect growth in demand in all the sectors, be it stainless or batteries or alloys. And we see supply growth concentrating in Indonesia and Indonesian NPI, which is predominantly a source for stainless steel production. In the longer run, we believe there are challenges in sourcing high-grade, responsible nickel for other applications. First of all, the battery applications. Next slide. Moving to copper, this metal is the least affected by the COVID amongst our metal basket. It remains fairly balanced, and this has been historically the feature of this market. There are so many players, so many mines and processors and consumers that macro statistics work perfectly well, and this market always tends to self-balance itself. The growing Chinese imports do give room for optimism. The surplus that we see is rather statistical, meaning that we do have a number, but given the size of the market, it's immaterial, and we would look at it as a fairly balanced market. And in any case, this market is on the recovery side. The typical swing factor in the copper market are usually disruptions. If we look back into the history of the market, they tend to be around 5%. This year, despite the pandemic and the lockdowns, actually the disruptions are somewhat lower than the historical. And there hasn't been a major change to the market. The copper market is extremely robust and healthy and extremely fundamental. This is why we consider it to be a macro metal. Next slide. Before we move to precious metals, we should emphasize that automotive is becoming a very crucial sector for both precious and base metals, with the electric technology and the infrastructure that needs to support electric vehicles. This year has been extremely difficult for the automotive. In our view, this was probably the worst crisis this industry has experienced ever, and we will be on the recovery path. We have seen better sales end of this year, but it will take time, probably until 2022, before we're back on the pre-crisis trajectory of this market. Next slide. Automotive is a dominant source of demand for palladium, over 80%. So obviously the decline in car sales was very negative for the palladium intake. This was partly offset by higher loadings in the catalyst. That is a global trend. We have seen China moving to China 6B, effectively skipping 6A. We have seen Europe moving to real drive emission tests. We have seen a high share of SUVs being sold in the United States. So all of those major markets had to increase the loading of palladium per vehicle, thus softening the effect of pandemic, but obviously not enough to cover for the fall in the car sales. Nevertheless, because of the decade of deficit we have seen in this market, we're still in a modest deficit, and it's in the end rather beneficial and healthy for the market that we are avoiding huge deficits and disappointed consumers. We will see partial recovery, and we are very much certain that the automotive market will continue to flourish as it has been doing for the past 100 years. If we look into what's happening with the history of this market, we had 10 years of successive deficit. We have a decline in the scrap supply. This has to do with the loadings that were used 12, 15 years ago. We have lower supply from South Africa this year, but we presume that they will catch up in the next 2 years, delivering the metal that wasn't refined this year, but has been mined. The rest of the world didn't bring much of a change to the supply, so we can say that this is a fairly stable market. Next slide. Platinum is currently balanced, but this is due to lesser supply rather than healthy demand. The supply obviously was impacted by the same reasons as palladium, as both metals come essentially from the same sources. And it's again South Africa. The scrap was also less. In the longer run, we believe that this metal will be essential to many applications, but in the shorter term, we do expect a meaningful surplus coming in 2021, although a very big portion of it could be absorbed by investment. We have seen examples of this in recent years, and for those that believe in the platinum story, it's a good opportunity to start their investment as the prices are lower than fundamentally they would be justified. Next slide. If we look at the overall trends impacting the metals market, there's quite a collection, but most of them have a connection to carbon footprint and climate change, moving to new types of energy generation, wind, solar, the ones that do not have a carbon footprint, moving to different type of transportation that is electricity-based, be it battery electric or plug-in or fuel cells. And all of that requires an infrastructure that supports power storage, distribution, and generation. So all in all, this is beneficial to our metals basket, which is a perfect fit for the new type of economy with the new demands for energy. Next slide. Climate change is obviously a global priority, and most governments and companies are focusing on greenhouse gases, predominantly CO2. This does affect the powertrain. There are very different views on the way it could develop. We are looking at this market, but mostly we build our forecast bottom up, looking at what the car companies are saying about the future and the way they structure their production. So BEVs do capture the public eyes, but in our view, hybrids still will be a bigger share for the next few years in comparison to battery electric vehicles. And there is a very good reason for this. The plug-in hybrids generate about 1/5 of the CO2 footprint in comparison to a conventional ICE car, which is a very good progress. And it does help to reach the climate change goals that are set globally. At the same time, they're less dependent on the power supply and grid, and they do offer consumer benefits. So we believe this is a very robust technology. But in any case, to us, the future of the automotive sector is more about diversity. We don't believe there will be a single technology dominating this market. So we see the world moving away from conventional ICs to hybrids and battery electric vehicles, thus cutting on the carbon footprint. Next slide. If we look at what's happening overall in the automotive sector, the expected car production numbers, the change in powertrain, the change in regulation on exhaust fumes for ICEs. We do see a very strong market in palladium, even if we can see the possible substitution of palladium by platinum. Even in a reasonable modest forecast, we see long-term growth in this market of 1 to 2%. And we see this growth continuing for the next 20 years. In the same scenario, platinum is in the surplus midterm for the next few years, but in the longer run, there will be a deficit, and a very meaningful one, as platinum is an essential metal for many applications and many new and exciting technologies. Next slide. For the base metals, the outlook looks a bit more bullish. The nickel market is enjoying the growth in the battery segment, which is probably the best thing that happened to this market since the invention of stainless steel. There are different technologies in batteries, but the nickel ones are dominating, and we see this unchanged for the next 10 years. It's difficult to speak about what will happen in years to come, but in this horizon, there are no threats to nickel usage in electric vehicles and batteries. Its demand will increase. And we see a challenge in future supply of nickel. It needs to be high-grade nickel that can be converted into chemicals that go into the battery production. It has to be responsible nickel with all the ESG credentials that are required by the motor market, especially in the European Union and the automotive sector, which does get a lot of government and public attention. Copper is actually a big winner also, because it will be used not only in electric vehicles, but also the supporting infrastructure, ranging from power generation to power distribution to power storage. And we believe that the future demand for copper will be much higher. We don't see an issue in supplies, as there are reserves available. And unlike the rest of our metals, most of copper mining is open pit. So the companies don't really need a 10-time horizon to do their planning. Greenfield projects can be built in a reasonable time span, say 3 to 5 years. So we expect that this market will remain balanced. The question mark would be what price would be justifying investment into new mines. Next slide. So if we put all the trends together, we believe we have a bullish case for the full metal basket. There are different drivers, and some of them are not necessarily bullish for individual metals, but as a collection, they're certainly bullish to our markets in the long run. Being part of the basic industries doesn't mean that we are backwards in introducing new approaches, and to us, digitalization is a major trend, and it does apply to metal sales also. We are looking forward to introducing digital sales as early as this month with some of our existing clients. We expect this to grow. There is a number of deals that are being discussed, and we assume that up to 20% of our sales next year could be in digital form. We believe that this makes a very attractive option for both us and industrial consumers, but also there are very promising opportunities for the investors, which are an essential part of the commodities market. We are using a platform that is domiciled in Switzerland. The name is Atomize. The platform is based on blockchain, the Hyperledger, and it is developed by IBM, which are a global technology leader in IT technologies and blockchain specifically. Next slide. The benefits we see for ourselves are about increased liquidity. The digital sales and digital contracts actually open up opportunities for us to reach out not only to the first use, but also to the terminal users of metal-containing products, like car makers that don't necessarily use refined palladium or refined nickel. And this broadens our customer base and increases liquidity. Also, the opportunities for inventory management and investment demand. As we all know, the demand tends to be higher when there's a surplus in the market and prices are lower. So thus, investment demand absorbs surplus metal and releases it back to the industry once there's a deficit and prices are higher. In essence, ensuring that sustainability of supply is much better than without investors intervening into the metal flow. And we see benefits for the consumers that get the opportunity to have better management of their inventory and better risk management in commodities, especially for the downstream users. If we look what opportunities this brings, as an end user, you can secure long-term supply. You can forward the metal digitally to your processors without the need to actually handle storage or loading or delivery of metal. And we believe this is a great opportunity as supply of some of the metals are crucial to the automotive. And long-term reliability of supply is essential to their business model. So this ability to secure the metal before you decide on the processes does give a lot of flexibility and offers unique inventory management opportunities. At the same time, we're looking to couple the digital metal also with the ESG credentials and the carbon footprint, which is another important aspect for the consumers today. The metal that you consume is not just a chemical element. As a consumer, you need to make sure that it has all the sustainable development attributes it should have, that it is compliant, that it is ethical and responsible, and carbon footprint is becoming a must, especially in Europe, with the expectation of the carbon tax to come in the near future. If we look what this brings to the investors, next slide, we think it's a unique opportunity for investors to be exposed to the commodity metal, the spot price, especially for the base metals, as there's no similar vehicle available in the market currently. It's connected to the spot price of the physical metal, yet it's coupled with a rather low cost of ownership. And there are different options for the investors, how they could carry this inventory, and it's an opportunity to avoid unnecessary costs like holding futures and rolling them every few months. So there are less risks engaged in owning this asset. We believe that this is an incredible opportunity, and to facilitate this, we're looking to a diversity of tokens and vehicles that investors could use. We currently see a set of 3 types of tokens. The industrial tokens are essentially a digitalized supply contract that has a certain date of delivery and is tied to a specific grade of metal. The asset-backed token essentially is a digitalized physical metal lying in storage and secured. And the IBT is a token that is not supported by the physical metal in the warehouse, but rather for the metal that is to be produced, so it's stored in the ground. The benefit is that there is no storage cost allocated with it, so thus cost of ownership is much smaller. And we believe that this variety offers many exciting opportunities to the market participants, both on the industrial and the investment side. To facilitate investment, we have initiated an ETC structure that would help investors that are not prepared to embrace the digital technology today to use a very convenient and very familiar vehicle to be exposed to the tokens. The ETC structure is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. They are getting their listing on the major European commodity exchanges: London, Frankfurt, Milan, and Zurich. And this is something that is not new to the investment community, but does allow them to have direct access to the spot metal prices. We're very excited by these opportunities, and we think that digital brings a totally different future to the commodity markets. Let me pass the floor to our chairman, Mr. Gareth Penny, for the closing remarks.
Good afternoon, all of you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. You have, of course, today heard a great range of presentations from our colleagues on the strategy of Nornikel going forward, on the operations, on the changes and configuration to mining and recovery operations. But most importantly, I think today you've heard a great deal about ESG matters. It's really that topic that I want to talk to you about in particular today. As chairman of the board, we have focused over the last months, for obvious reasons, in particular on the issue of ESG. We had a tragic incident at the middle of the year, and we have needed to take every step possible to find out the reasons for that diesel spill and to look at the full consequences and changes that need to be made in the company in order to ensure that such an incident does not occur again. To that end, the board formed an entirely independent group called the Environmental Task Team, with 5 independent directors and with myself as chairman. That group of independent directors has met on a regular basis to review the cleanup operations, the spill itself, and of course, a wider range of ESG matters. Early on, we felt the need for support in this, and so following analysis, we recruited the help of ERM, Environmental Resource Management, a world-class organization with exactly the sort of capabilities that we felt we needed. We have worked closely with ERM over the past months as they did an analysis of the reasons for the diesel spill, of the cleanup operations, of contributing factors, and of course, of the lessons that needed to be learned and a series of recommendations. That ERM report, unfiltered, has now been put into the public domain, and it is there for all of you to look at. The board received this report from ERM last week and discussed it with them, and will now spend some time evaluating it and of course interacting with management and getting their detailed response and their plan to implement the various recommendations that have been put forward. Importantly, in these recommendations, it doesn't just address why the spill happened, what the root causes and the contributory factors were, or even just the other environmental considerations. But it looks further at the leadership and culture of Nornikel and what needs to change, and how we need to move from a compliance-based organization where we follow required rules and regulations, but actually a risk-based organization where we're able to consider adequately the risk and how to mitigate it in each part of the organization. Of course, we wanted an independent and external party to undertake such a review. We have nothing that we are not prepared to look at very carefully, and we wanted to make sure that the entire process was transparent. And so in due course, we will share with all of you the action plan and the conclusions that we've come to, both as a board and as management. What I can also tell you is that there have been a range of other ESG initiatives that have also taken place over the course of the past months. So, for example, we had the Great Norilsk Expedition that went up to Norilsk and to the wider Arctic area to take samples on land and in the water, and to do a full assessment of the impact of global warming on the Arctic region. That Great Norilsk Expedition, comprised of some 35 scientists and other related disciplines, and they will produce a comprehensive report by the end of this year, which we will examine carefully. We have also been engaging with indigenous people in the area and have come to a comprehensive agreement across a whole range of different initiatives to ensure that the nature of our operations is such that they allow for cooperation and positive interaction with the communities that are living nearby and further afield from our activities. We've also decided too that it is an important moment and opportunity to join organizations, or to seek to join them, I should say, such as the ICMM. This is a 2-year process, we know, and it will take an enormous amount of hard work to be able to gain that kind of accreditation, which we hope to achieve in the future. So what is important is to be able to take away the learnings and the lessons from these past months, to ensure that these kinds of issues do not occur again, and to embed them in the culture and the way in which we work in Nornikel. They need to be embedded in the KPIs of management, and they need to be clearly part of everyday life. Nornikel operates in a sensitive part of the world where things like global warming will have an impact. And we want to make sure that we're able to contribute in a very positive manner to these challenges that our world faces. As we look forward into the future, we know that our metal basket is uniquely geared towards a world where climate change and global warming will be very important factors in how we all do business. And we know that the positive impact that we can make is extraordinarily important. We also know that the way in which we need to operate and the care that we need to take needs to reflect the products for which indeed our metal basket is geared. What I can tell you is that from myself as the chairman, through the entire board, through the president of our company and senior management, we are all focused on these issues, and we're absolutely determined to get them right. We look forward to continuing to share on a regular basis the progress we're making in ESG matters. We are happy to be held to account, and we will make sure that we embed into the organization and its culture and an appreciation for the importance of so many aspects, or all aspects, I should say, of the ESG journey that we're on. So thank you all for your time and attention. We hope that we have dealt with a great range of activities that are important to you as the investing community and as stakeholders in our business. Thank you.
Norilsk Nickel, the leader of metal production of the future. Norilsk Nickel, sustainable development and social responsibility. A corporation focused on green economics, clean metals, clean production. Norilsk Nickel, confident about the future.
Dear all, thank you for listening into our today's presentation. We must say it's been really well-attended event we had over 600 views and 330 participants on this webcast. And we hope that we'll be seeing some of you within the next few days as part of our usual roadshow, this time albeit it will be actually a virtual one. Now we're ready to start a Q&A session. During the translation, we have received about 20 questions. The questions have been ranked in the order of popularity based on your likes. And in this room with us, we have two moderators, two esteemed equity research analysts, Nina Dergunova from Goldman Sachs and Boris Sinitsyn from VTB Capital. They have kindly agreed to ask questions on your behalf. The questions will be asked in a descending order based on their popularity and exactly how they were phrased. And unfortunately, given the time restrictions, if we're not able to answer all of your questions, please feel free to follow up with our IR team later on. The video translation of today's webcast will be available on our website tomorrow. And now we're happy to pass the microphones over to our moderators. Over to you.
Thank you. And the first question that appeared to be most popular among our webcast listeners is the following. Is Norilsk planning to purchase any palladium companies in the next few months?
So let me answer this question. I think it's an easy one. So it's not on the agenda. As we highlighted today in the presentation, we have quite substantial organic growth program. And so our focus is to execute this program.
Thank you for the answer. My next question is on expected palladium demand in the next few years, and how does company's long-term strategy reconcile with it?
So,
The palladium demand is very strongly correlated with the car sales. It's by far the biggest application for palladium. We do expect the car sector to recover next year. It already has started recovering as we speak. And obviously this will bring to very robust demand for palladium. And as a supplier, we do aim to create a very credible and reliable supply of palladium. And we envision increasing with time our palladium output.
And perhaps answering the second part of the question, so how Nornikel is going to reconcile with these trends. So may I ask to put on the screen the page number 48. And as we many times stressed that we see our leadership role in the palladium market by providing a long-term security of supply and providing additional volumes that are required by the markets of the future. And as you can see in the graph on the page 48, so we do have a growth plan for palladium, which is up to 50% of metal production growth for this metal in the long run.
Fair enough, thank you.
Thanks. And are there any plans to establish closer cooperation with any EV batteries producers to capitalize on EV adoption trends?
I think, could I start answering this question by saying that this new market segment does really require a new approach also in terms of sales and marketing. As it was already highlighted today by our CEO, Mr. Potanin, and by Anton in his part, so this market will need more customized offering from Nornikel. And that's why it means that we'll need to be closer to our clients, more client-centric in terms of our production offering. And we do have already a good example of such closer cooperation that was already mentioned today by our CEO, which is our long-term agreement with BASF. And this format is scalable both with BASF and other market participants. And strategically, we are able to deliver up to 100,000 tons of nickel that would be suitable for the battery materials market.
Thank you. Next question from my side is actually on your EV market forecasts. Previously, the company mentioned that the future in EV, the nearest future, maybe midterm future, will be dependent on hybrids. This is not actually the case, at least for the last couple of years. So the question is, have the views changed on your side?
They have not. We still see hybrids having higher sales than battery electric vehicles. And from the engineering point of view and from consumer point of view, there are so many benefits that the hybrids can offer. It's a combination of two powertrains, so it adds to the complexity. But as a consumer, you really need the driving power and the thrust only when you accelerate. So you can get great performance out of a hybrid without building an expensive battery or an expensive combustion engine. And also from the infrastructure point of view, you are less dependent on the charging. You can still use the car if the battery is flat. And we think that the environmental benefits are incredible. You do get incredible fuel consumption and about 5 times decrease in CO2 emissions. That's what's important for the climate change and the carbon-free economy. So we think they still have a very good stand, and this is what the car companies are mostly speaking about, that hybrids would dominate their production line.
And as a follow-up on the palladium, by your estimates, how big are the remaining above-the-ground palladium stocks?
Well, that's a $1 million question. I wish I knew the precise number. It's very difficult to make an assessment of the actual metal line on the ground, and also to make the split between what's available commercially as supply and what is part of the value chain, say, for the consumers. And there's so many components that are very difficult to check or verify or measure. But I would say that probably we're looking at a few months of global consumption as inventory.
Next question from my side, please. The question is on your dividend policy. What will be your dividend policy in coming years, probably until 2022 and beyond?
Well, as we said during today's presentation, currently the dividend policy is part of major shareholders agreement, and this next financial year 2021, is the last year that actually falls under the formula of the current major shareholders agreement. As you may know, the major shareholders agreement expires on January 1st, 2023, and what will happen beyond that is really a matter of shareholders whether they will enter into a new agreement or we won't have any. We as a management would like to reiterate our position, and this is something that should not sound new to you. This is something that we have communicated to you in the past, that we would like to switch to a free cash flow based formula. We would also like to reiterate that maintaining investment grade credit rating is something that is our strategic priority, and we believe that we can afford paying a major part of our free cash flow as dividends for as long as it doesn't compromise our financial stability.
That is clear, thank you. And the next question about the Arctic Palladium. Are you reviving the JV? And if yes, how quickly do you plan to move with the development?
So the deal that was reported at the previous strategy day is no more on the table. As you might know from the press, so the deal was blocked by Rusal. And it looks that colleagues made incorrect judgment call, as they obviously regretted it and publicly acknowledged that the reversion to this deal would be in the interest of the company, could be in the interest of the company. But as I said, the deal is no more on the table, as the partners from Russian Platinum are no more ready to progress, to act at the same terms and conditions.
Thank you. The next question is on your another joint operation, existing one, which is Bystrynsky mine. Are you still going to spin it off or IPO?
Well, IPO still remains an option. However, currently we can't really give any indication with regards to potential timing or the size of the offering. Previously, the timing of this IPO was really conditioned upon the project being fully ramped up. Now, as the project is operating at full capacity and we're actually ready to take it public, in principle, we don't really have a sign-off from our major shareholders. And they are not really, I mean, the major shareholders are not really informing us about the rationale for not signing it off. So therefore, I mean, the quality of the feedback is quite poor, and therefore we can't really give any more precise sort of indication.
Understood. The next question relates to ESG. Can you add details on how Norilsk plans to expand management ESG KPIs to include environmental performance?
Yeah, I'll take that question. In the course of the previous, of the current presentation, we have shared with you the essential elements of our holistic environmental strategy and described how it comprises both, comprises air, water, land, waste, and tailings, use of clean technologies. In each and every area of the strategy, there will be a roadmap of specific deliverables assigned to specific departments and services in the company. We shall translate these deliverables into operational language, like various changes that are anticipated, events that are going to happen, and all this would be time-specific and time-bound. Implementation or achievement of these events and changes, etc., will be the base for specific key performance indicators that will be tailored to, again, specific functions of departments and services. Well, the details of those KPIs are not available at the moment, as the definition of these KPIs is still going on, but the general intent is quite obvious.
Thank you. The next question is on your environmental capex. What actual projects and programs do you expect to execute in the next 12 months? And I believe there's another question looking on the longer term horizon from 2020 until 2030. What is the total capex you plan to spend on ESG?
On our sulfur program, let me ask to put slide number 60 on the screen. So let me remind that what's called Sulfur Program 2.0 consists of a variety of projects. And in my presentation, I gave some flavor. They are not new. So these are the projects that we actually announced in this configuration in the last strategy day. So the capex for the sulfur dioxide emission capturing and utilization program accounts for 3.6 billion. So the number I also gave in my section in the presentation. And if you look at the broader environmental agenda, so as Mr. Bugrov also presented today, we have various streams in our holistic environmental program, and the whole number for capex that stands for E component of ESG metrics, namely the environment, accounts for 5.5 billion. And on other components of ESG, meaning S and G, I think there is no aggregate number that we possess at the time being, but there are a number of initiatives that were named today, and on some of these initiatives we also put some number tags, but some of these initiatives are still in progress, so the numbers will be calculated and budgeted in the future.
Thank you.
And there is a follow-up on your
Can I just add to that, that the question itself is formulated sort of in the wrong way. Talking about 12 months. The environmental projects that the company has embarked on, is implementing now, they would cause such a fundamental change in the way the business is done by the company that you cannot implement that in 12 months. You have to speak in terms of much longer period of time. And Sergey was quite right that $5.5 billion that would be spent on environmental projects. This is a assumption, that working assumption, that we have for the period up until year 2030. Yeah. That would be a more correct way of explaining the plans that the company has in terms of capex for environmental projects.
Yeah, thank you much for this correction. So I think, yeah, the question was quite comprehensive, included many topics, one of them being the holistic program, and another our budgets for next year. So we, of course, have an estimate for the next year as well, and the estimate exceeds $500 million already for next year. But of course, the numbers that I gave, they spread over next 5 years.
And you already mentioned the sulfur capturing project, and we have a detailed question from the webcast. Why Norilsk abandoned its wide-known plans to produce elemental sulfur to drop sulfur dioxide emission?
As I said, and as we already highlighted on the slide that was just here on the screen, so we have a holistic environmental, namely sulfur dioxide capturing program that is based on the most proven and efficient technology to capture sulfur dioxide, which is actually capturing into sulfuric acid. This particular technology is widely used in the industry and actually provides, as I said, the most efficient solution for emission reduction, for gas capturing, for the furnaces, facilities where it is applied. It actually can capture 99% plus of gases.
Thank you. Next question is on your largest export markets in terms of revenue. What is the split today in terms of largest countries where you export metals, and do you expect this to change in the next decade?
Well, our biggest export markets are the European Union, China, and United States, and probably it will stay this way for the next 10 years.
Thank you.
And the next question relates to your HPP3 accident. Could you please provide some comments around the current state of the legal proceedings versus state regarding the potential $2 billion environmental fine?
Let me take this question. The legal proceedings are ongoing. The next meeting of the arbitration court of the Krasnoyarsk region has been scheduled for December the 4th. But I guess as any participant of legal proceedings, you probably appreciate that we cannot really provide any further comments regarding these proceedings. All we can say is that the amount of environmental damages which we have booked in our first half financial results, $2.1 billion, in our opinion, reflects the most conservative scenario.
Thank you. Next question is on net zero targets. So a lot of companies currently are embracing low carbon strategies with net zero targets flagged by most of them for 2050. What is the company strategy here? And as a follow-up on this, what is the current breakdown of fossil fuel mix in the energy generation of Nornikel?
Well, the net zero target seems to be on everyone's mind these days. And before commenting on this issue, I would like to say that one should bear in mind that as a priority step, that the company plans in terms of cutting the emissions, the priority is to cut dramatically our sulfur dioxide emission by year 2030. And this has been described by Sergey in much greater detail. I sometimes can't help the feeling that the investors and other stakeholders do not appreciate that objective in full. Now, we are, of course, cognizant of the plans to achieve net zero emission of CO2 by year 2050. And investors remind us constantly of these plans and targets at regular intervals. In our current climate change strategy, we feel quite comfortable if we maintain absolute scope 1+2 greenhouse gas emissions from operations below 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent. I would again want to reiterate, we would feel quite comfortable if we maintain 10 million tons CO2 equivalent emissions. What would this mean? This would mean that we maintain scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions per ton of nickel equivalent in the bottom quartile of global metals and mining industry G&G intensity curve. This would be our target for 2030, but like I said, internal deliberations continue.
Thank you. A follow-up on this, actually. With regards to your plans to grow output by 2030, do you expect that your greenhouse emissions would actually also grow with the 30 to 40% increase in metals production expected by 2030?
Well, I guess if my understanding is correct, this is a question about how to decouple the emission of green gases and the increase in production that we have announced. I think that the only, by the way, the best way to decouple greenhouse gas emissions and increase production is to decrease carbon intensity of a unit of our production. And well, it's easily said than done, of course. But we are currently working internally on identifying right technologies improvements or replacement of those. And we will announce the plans as they mature. But one should also take into account that the economy of scale can also be helpful in this regard. As the production will be expanded, the relative consumption of energy and other elements may turn out to be significantly lower, and that would also work towards decrease in carbon intensity, and thus would help us to decouple the emissions and the increased production.
Thank you.
And the next question comes about the regulatory environment. Regarding the mineral tax increase effective 2021, are there tax breaks or deductions available for domestic or green capex? What will be the net increase for Norilsk? And should we regard this increase as a one-off pandemic charge or the new normal?
There are no any deductions available for some green capex, green projects, unfortunately. At spot exchange rate, the net negative effect from MAT increase on our EBITDA is approximately $400 million. According to public comments, the recent hike in MAT was driven by the government's intend to even out taxation of mineral resource companies with their international peers. As you appreciate, we don't know the government's tax plans.
Thank you. Next question is on recent assessment by ERM on the diesel spill accident. So the question is, what is the company's revised in-house assessment, if any, of environmental costs against the state estimation of 2.1 billion?
Our current assessment of total cleanup and other costs directly attributable to the incident, including capex, is 13.5 billion rubles, which is just a little less than $200 million at spot exchange rate. As of today, we have already incurred one third of this amount.
Thank you.
And another interesting question about the markets. The prices of rhodium have doubled from the summer. Could you describe in amounts what is Norilsk rhodium sales and what prices are they based on?
Sure. Typically we would sell all the rhodium we produce. This is roughly 80,000 ounces a year. And we use the global benchmark prices, such as New York Daily Mint, to sell our metal.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is actually on follow-up on palladium prices. What is the company's view for the next 3 to 10 years on palladium prices, especially taking into consideration the upcoming increase of EV sales and probable decrease of internal combustion engine cars sold?
We can't speak about the future prices. This would be in violation of antitrust, but we can speak about demand. And for the next 10 to 15 years at least, we see no decline in the number of ICE units being installed. We do see a high degree of electrification of cars, but as we've discussed previously, in our view, it's mostly about hybrids rather than going through the way of battery electric vehicles. And hybrids still need the catalyst, so in our view, demand for palladium will go up, and this will be true for the full PGM basket. It's not only palladium, it's also platinum and rhodium.
Thank you.
And the last question that we have from the webcast is the following. Will additional investments in modernization of nickel refining in Kola include nickel chemicals for batteries? How do you see the current supply and demand and pricing premiums for nickel chemicals?
Nickel chemicals is a very diverse market. This is not a commodity, unlike, say, the nickel cathode or the nickel briquette. So I can assume that the question refers mostly to nickel sulfate, which is the typical feed for battery production. This market is rather regional because when you take this product, nickel is only 22% of the composition. So when you do your logistics, you're roughly paying 5 times per unit of nickel in comparison to transporting metal. There are very different markets, China and Asia, Europe, United States. So nickel sulfate tends to be locally supplied, and the pricing benchmarks can vary very much between the regions because the arbitrage is not really doable because of the logistics and the challenges in transporting crystallized sulfate.
And on coal refining, so as I said in the presentation, this project, potential project, is still in scoping stage. All options are being explored. Also, in terms of the product portfolio that we might envisage for the renewed refinery.
Thank you.
Thank you. Since we don't have any questions on webcast, probably 2 follow-ups from my side, please. In terms of capex, over the last couple of years, actual capex has been consistently below initial guidance, maybe by 30%. So does the management plan to stick to new capex guidance, and what might help it to achieve it?
If I may ask to put slide 62 on the screen. So that tells you in brief on how we are going to tackle the challenges that we actually highlighted quite a few times already. We said that some deviation in terms of the how quickly we ramp up the investment resources or construction forces in the region was pretty much limited by the construction market that is in deficit in the quite autonomous Norilsk region. So the way we tackle this challenge is how I described in the presentation. So we put much effort, we are quite proactive in actually attracting contractors into the region, making sure that we have low barriers to entry and favorable conditions for quality contractors to be present in the market. And on the other side, also strengthening our internal capabilities in terms of project management. So again, the challenge is acknowledged, but we also have a certain course of actions actually to overcome this challenge.
Thank you. The last question from my side is on your cost cutting and on your productivity gains. I think last year you've disclosed quite strong achievements in terms of productivity. I think it grew 15% over the last several years, whereas the ore production volume was up just 7%. So the question is, do you still have some room in terms of productivity improvement in coming years?
Yeah, I will take this question. And I think, every company got, the capacity and opportunity to improve efficiency by at least, the 3 to 5% on an annual basis. And, the new projects and the change in technology obviously going to give, the bigger boost in the efficiency. So to answer your question shortly, yes, we see, further improvements in the efficiency.
Thank you.
Great. And with this, we pass the word back to Vladimir Zhukov to complete today's event.
Well, thank you everyone for listening into our event. Thank you moderators for kindly agreeing to help us with organizing it. And we may actually conclude now and hope to see you in the nearest future at our virtual various means of communications. Thank you.
Thanks very much.